Is the African Revolution beginning in Kenya? Is Kenya taking the lead in what will become known as the African Revolution? According to many Africans, a revolution is bound to happen in Africa to change the status quo. Africa is the world's richest continent in mineral resources but only enjoys less than 3% of the world's wealth. Is this fair? The answer is no. Many Western countries deliberately use African leaders to keep Africa and Africans impoverished. Africans are being used as cheap laborers by the West with the complicity of corrupt African leaders to extract minerals from their own lands and export them to the West. Africa is a continent of 54 countries and has been projected to be the breadbasket of the world in the near future. The development of Africa would mean the retrogression of many rich countries today in the world, especially Western countries like France, the United Kingdom, the United States, Belgium, etc. As a result, the West, especially the aforementioned countries, would do anything in their power to hold the continent down for their own prosperity to continue. There is no two ways about it. If Africa rises, Europe and America fall.
Sub-Saharan Africa has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow Sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep Sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay? So the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay? And to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. You know, so this is what we do in academic institutions. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. We cannot afford to allow Africa to industrialize and start producing manufactures. Okay, so we will do everything to stop that. And I'm going to show you how we actually block that. We had East Asian rapid industrialization processes. So in the earlier period, we had Japan and Korea and Taiwan. Okay, rapid growth, sucking in raw materials from Africa, driving up the prices. And after those countries finished industrialization, then Sub-Saharan African growth rate again fell. Sub-Saharan Africa is condemned to this role. Just the supplier of raw materials, not a manufacturer. The currencies are collapsing of these countries, and many of them are Sub-Saharan African countries. After colonization ended, we needed new structures to keep these countries where they were. Okay? And the first of those is aid. Okay? We give them aid. Aid for what? Actually, we give them aid to keep repressive regimes in power. That's all. All the hypocrisy about transparency and democracy and bullshit like that, it's all bullshit. But it would go to country after country offering loans. And if the president did not accept the loan, they were killed. It's just economics. It's economic warfare. The rich declare war on the poor. It happens everywhere. It happens in a country. The rich control the government. Of course they do. You really believe you have democracy? Come on. Grow up. Who has all the subsidies and income support? US, Europe. The largest budgets in the world for supporting their farmers are Europe and US. You see, we're keeping them dependent. We're keeping them on a string. This next round of the WTO is designed to block that. To block anyone else getting on top of the land.
Also take a listen to the Westerner exposing Western atrocities against Africa and Africans.
But the truth is, it's a million miles from the reality of EU-Africa trade policy as it exists now. Because our economic relations with Africa are simply a continuation of European colonialism, perpetuating exploitation by other means. Africa trades more with Europe than it does with itself. It's portrayed as a poor continent, but actually it's the richest. It's just that the people there are denied the fruits of their land and their labour by unequal economic relations, by unfair trade rules, by illicit capital flights into the Western banks, and by multinational corporations allowed off the leash by Washington, London and Brussels. I don't think you'd have to be a genius to know that the last thing the Horn of Africa needs is more foreign military bases, more weapons and more European meddling. What we call our strategic relationship isn't about human flourishing, it's about the EU's ambitions as a superpower. There's now a new great game in the Horn of Africa. Greater and lesser powers are pockmarking the place with military bases. France, the US, China, Germany, Japan, Italy, Saudi Arabia all have a presence in the tiny area of Djibouti alone. Mercenaries are swarming in from all quarters. The entire region is being militarized. War is in the air. And what about the people facing climate and food insecurity? None of this benefits them. We talk about instability, but we only make it worse. We flood the place with weapons, hand over the profits to European arms companies and charge the bill to our citizens. And then with the carnage we go back in and we do it all again. It's a racket. Strategic relationship, it's one thing after another, isn't it? Really, it's the same as it ever was. And all I can say is God save Africa from Europeans offering help.
For the looting of African resources to continue, Western powers impose corrupt African leaders on African countries to do their bidding. These African leaders, who are Western puppets, grant free access to their Western masters to extract or loot their country's mineral resources. In return, they gain recognition from their Western masters, who only give them a tiny fraction of the funds generated from their country's looted minerals. The paradox is that these corrupt African leaders do not save their looted funds in their bank accounts in their countries. Rather, they save them in their bank accounts in the West in foreign currencies to the detriment of their own country's currency. On 18 December 2023, the former French minister, Thierry Breton, publicly declared the following on X, and I quote, "It's the imbecility of Emmanuel Macron that opened the eyes of Africans. One thing is sure. If France loses its colonies, our children and grandchildren will go to Africa to search for their livelihoods. Immigration will change direction. Macron needs to go. If not, France will suffer. Europe needs to unite to fight this new African vision. If one of the heads of the putschists falls, the others will abandon the vision. Africa does not have a history. So, Africa can't manage the world." End quote. As Western countries secretly and deliberately wreak havoc on African economies through their puppet African leaders, they come out publicly to call Africans fools for being unable to govern themselves properly, whereas they are the hand behind the retrogression and decimation of Africa. Take a listen.
It's interesting, we heard from the Minister of DRC. What's wrong with your country? Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? And so we have a system, but we need a different system. We cannot turn this over to the private sector. We already did about 100 years ago. Not only to the private sector with the U.S. military behind it.
Now, coming to the main topic of this video, the Kenyan president, William Ruto, was elected into office on 13 September 2022. Upon his election, he promised loyalty to the Kenyan people and the Kenyan constitution. In the early months of his presidency, he adopted a firm stance against Western imperialism, which has deliberately kept Africans poor and has dehumanized Africans for centuries. He spoke against the World Bank and the IMF's strategy to keep African countries highly indebted and impoverished. He also criticized the docility and sycophancy of African leaders before the West.
What we are saying is different. Is that what you're saying? You're saying is good, but it's not what you're saying. We are not saying that we continue to have what the taxes France is paying, the taxes Kenya is paying in the current setup. Those are national issues. We need a financial transaction tax at a global level where even countries like Kenya pay. We do not want anything for free. You will pay more eventually because you have a bigger economy. We will pay commensurate to our economy. And we want those resources controlled not by IMF and World Bank. Because IMF and World Bank, you have the final say. We don't have no say. We want another organization of equals, where you have as much say because you pay, as much as we do because we also pay. That's the organization we are looking for. And that is why we are saying we need a new financial architecture where governance, where power is not on the hands of a few people. We can agree on the governance of the institution. We can agree on the sharing of power so that all of us have access to resources that go to making sure.
A few months later, Ruto started doing the opposite of all that he had said when he assumed office. He became visibly a Western puppet. A financial year in Kenya begins on 1 July of the current calendar year and ends on 30 June of the following year. On 26 June 2023, President William Ruto signed into law the Finance Act 2023, which was subsequently gazetted on 27 June 2023. A majority of the content of the bill took effect on 1 July 2023, while a few others took effect on 1 September 2023. This act introduced fundamental changes to Kenya's tax and social contribution regime. One such change is the introduction of a housing levy, which requires both employers and employees to contribute to the National Housing Development Fund, the introduction of a new tax band of 32.5% for income between 500,000 Kenyan shillings and 800,000 Kenyan shillings, and 35% for income exceeding 800,000 Kenyan shillings. Although only a few people earn income in this range. The Act introduced the VAT on petroleum products, excluding LPG gas, from 8% to 16%. This alone was expected to impact the cost of living due to its use in many sectors of the Kenyan economy. As the 2023 finance bill impacted the lives of millions of Kenyans and many Kenyans were still reeling from its impact, the government announced the Financial Bill 2024, which was more crippling and devastating to many Kenyans who were already bearing the brunt of the 2023 finance bill. The call of Kenyans on the government not to pass the 2024 financial bill into law fell on deaf ears. This is exactly what happens in almost all the African countries. The executive arms of government literally control the legislative and the judiciary arms of government. The legislators and the judges have nothing to lose as they all belong to the same criminal syndicate. They loot the public treasury without any remorse and later increase taxes for the poor citizens to pay. If anybody thinks the status quo in corrupt African countries would remain the same, that person should rethink, because nothing lasts forever. Liberalism did not come to Europe in the last quarter of the 18th century without a price. Freedom did not come to the 13 British colonies that is now the United States of America without a fight. African leaders should listen to their people instead of conniving with their Western powers who loot the country's resources, and give them a tiny fraction of the spoils which they in turn save in Western bank accounts to the detriment of the currency of their countries and their citizens. Instead of engaging the protesters for a dialogue, President Ruto thought he could get away with his shenanigan as usual. The reverse was the case. He met the full forces of desperate Kenyans who were already being suffocated by the impact of the 2023 finance bill. All corrupt African leaders should take note of what is happening right now in Kenya, because it will definitely come to their doorsteps. After spilling the blood of young Kenyans through the Kenyan police, President William Ruto came out to issue a statement renouncing the proposed bill. Take a listen.
To the people of Kenya, who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill.
After his speech, we heard the protesters chanting this. Here, we can hear the protesters chanting, "Ruto must go." Would this be the end of William Ruto in Kenya? Would this be the end of the leadership of a Western puppet in Africa? Would this be the beginning of the downfall of Western puppets in Africa? Would this be the beginning of that great African revolution that would turn the tide of things in Africa? If the Kenyan revolution succeeds, which African country would be next? Share your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe to this channel for more related videos. Thanks for watching.